Borderline personality disorder. Borderline personality disorder, or BPD, is characterized by intense, unstable relationships, a fragmented sense of self, and extreme emotional reactions. People with BPD experience emotions much more intensely than others, and these emotions can shift rapidly from one extreme to another. They often struggle with an unstable self-image, meaning their sense of who they are can change dramatically depending on the situation or the people they're with. One of the most prominent features of BPD is the fear of abandonment. This fear can be so intense that it leads to frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment, even if that abandonment isn't actually happening. People with BPD might interpret normal situations, like a friend taking a while to respond to a text message, as signs that they're being abandoned. The relationships of someone with BPD tend to be intense but unstable. They might idealize someone one day, seeing them as perfect and wonderful, but then completely devalue that same person the next day over a minor disagreement. This pattern is sometimes called splitting, viewing people as either all good or all bad, with no middle ground. Impulsivity is another key characteristic. This might show up as reckless spending, unsafe driving, substance abuse, binge eating, or risky sexual behavior. There's also often a pattern of self-harm or suicidal behavior, which serves as a way to cope with overwhelming emotions. Let me give you an example of how BPD might look in everyday life. Sarah has been dating Mike for 3 months. When Mike mentions he's going out with friends on Saturday night, Sarah immediately assumes he's trying to get away from her and that he's probably going to break up with her. She becomes extremely upset, accusing him of not caring about her and threatening to end their relationship herself before he can abandon her. The next day, when Mike brings her flowers and apologizes for the misunderstanding, Sarah feels completely different. Now she thinks Mike is the most wonderful person in the world and can't imagine why she was so upset. This cycle of intense fear, emotional outbursts, and rapid shifts between idealizing and devaluing relationships is typical of BPD. Narcissistic Personality Disorder. Now let's move on to Narcissistic Personality Disorder, or NPD. This disorder is characterized by a grandiose sense of self-importance, a constant need for admiration, and a lack of empathy for others. People with NPD have an inflated view of their own abilities, achievements, and importance. They genuinely believe they are special, unique, or superior to others. Someone with NPD often fantasizes about unlimited success, power, beauty, or ideal love. They believe they deserve special treatment and expect others to recognize their superiority without having achievements that actually warrant this recognition. They have a sense of entitlement, expecting favorable treatment and automatic compliance with their expectations. The need for constant admiration is another key feature. People with NPD require excessive amounts of praise and validation from others to maintain their self-esteem. They often fish for compliments and become upset when they don't receive the level of admiration they believe they deserve. Perhaps most notably, people with NPD struggle significantly with empathy. They have difficulty recognizing or caring about the feelings and needs of others. They often exploit relationships for personal gain and have trouble maintaining genuine, reciprocal relationships because everything tends to revolve around them. They also tend to be preoccupied with envy, either envying others whom they perceive as more successful or believing that others are envious of them. They often display arrogant behaviors and attitudes, looking down on people they perceive as inferior. Here's an everyday example. David works in marketing and believes he's the most talented person at his company, despite being relatively new and having limited experience. When his team completes a successful project, David takes most of the credit, telling everyone how his brilliant ideas made it all possible. When a colleague gets a promotion that David wanted, he becomes furious, convinced that the decision was unfair and that his colleague must have played politics to get ahead. David can't understand why his coworkers don't seem to appreciate his obvious talent, and he often interrupts others in meetings to share what he considers to be superior insights. He rarely asks about his colleagues' personal lives and seems genuinely surprised when he learns that others have problems or achievements of their own. In David's world, he's the main character, and everyone else is just supporting cast. Antisocial Personality Disorder. Another important disorder is Antisocial Personality Disorder, often referred to as ASPD. This disorder involves a pervasive pattern of disregarding and violating the rights of others. People with ASPD consistently break social norms and rules, often engaging in behavior that could lead to arrest or legal trouble. One of the key characteristics is a failure to conform to social norms regarding lawful behavior. This doesn't necessarily mean they're always committing major crimes, but they consistently ignore rules and social expectations. They might lie frequently, use aliases, or engage in repeated acts of deceit for personal gain or pleasure. People with antisocial personality disorder tend to be highly impulsive, making decisions without considering the consequences. They often fail to plan ahead and live very much in the moment. This impulsivity, combined with their disregard for others, can lead to aggressive behavior and frequent fights or physical confrontations. There's also a consistent pattern of irresponsibility. They might fail to maintain steady employment, neglect financial obligations, or abandon responsibilities as parents or partners. They show little remorse for their actions and often rationalize or minimize the harm they cause to others. Perhaps most concerning is their lack of empathy and remorse. After hurting someone, they might show what appears to be remorse, but it's often superficial and manipulative rather than genuine. They're typically very good at appearing charming and convincing when it serves their purposes. It's important to note that ASPD is different from the popular conception of a psychopath or sociopath, though there can be overlap. Not everyone with ASPD is violent, and the disorder exists on a spectrum of severity. Here's an example of how ASPD might manifest. Tom has a history of getting fired from jobs, usually because he lies about his qualifications, steals from employers, or starts conflicts with coworkers. He's charismatic and can be very charming when he wants something, which is how he convinces people to lend him money that he never pays back. Tom has been married twice, and both marriages ended because of his infidelity and financial irresponsibility. He shows up to his kids' school events when it's convenient for him, but often cancels at the last minute, leaving his children disappointed. When confronted about his behavior, Tom either denies it, blames others, or offers apologies that sound sincere, but never lead to actual change. He genuinely doesn't seem to understand why people get upset with him, and he views their reactions as unreasonable or overly dramatic. Histrionic Personality Disorder. Now let's examine histrionic personality disorder, or HPD. This disorder is characterized by excessive attention-seeking behavior and intense, rapidly shifting emotions. People with HPD have an overwhelming need to be the center of attention and feel uncomfortable when they're not. Someone with HPD displays emotions that seem exaggerated or theatrical to others. Their emotional expression often appears shallow or rapidly shifting, changing from one intense emotion to another very quickly. They tend to be highly suggestible, easily influenced by others or by circumstances, and their opinions can change frequently based on who they're with or what they've recently heard. People with HPD often use their physical appearance to draw attention to themselves. They might dress provocatively or in ways that stand out, and they're usually very concerned with how others perceive them physically. They tend to be sexually seductive or provocative in inappropriate situations, not necessarily because they're interested in sex, but because it gets them attention. Their speech style is often impressionistic and lacks detail. They might speak dramatically about events but provide very few specific facts. They also tend to view relationships as more intimate than they actually are, referring to acquaintances as close friends or believing that casual relationships are deeply meaningful. The constant need for attention can be exhausting for those around them. They might create drama or crises to ensure they remain the focus of attention, and they often feel genuinely distressed when they're not receiving the level of attention they believe they deserve. Here's an everyday scenario. Jessica works in an office where she's known for her dramatic storytelling and colorful outfits. During lunch breaks, she often dominates conversations with elaborate tales about her weekend adventures, speaking with great emotion but providing few concrete details. When a coworker announces an engagement, Jessica immediately shifts the attention to herself by dramatically revealing that she's practically engaged to someone she's been dating for only a few weeks. At office parties, Jessica tends to dress more provocatively than the situation calls for and positions herself where she can be seen by the most people. When her supervisor gives praise to another employee during a team meeting, Jessica becomes visibly upset and finds a reason to leave the room dramatically. Later, she tells colleagues that she's been having serious personal problems that require their support and attention. Jessica genuinely feels that she needs this level of attention to feel valued and important, and she's often confused when others find her behavior excessive or inappropriate. Avoidant Personality Disorder. Moving on to Avoidant Personality Disorder, or AVPD. This disorder involves a pervasive pattern of social inhibition, feelings of inadequacy, and hypersensitivity to negative evaluation. People with AVPD desperately want close relationships and social connections, but their fear of rejection and criticism keeps them from pursuing these connections. Someone with AVPD avoids occupational activities that involve significant interpersonal contact because they fear criticism, disapproval, or rejection. They might turn down promotions or job opportunities that would require more social interaction, even if they're qualified and interested in the work itself. They're extremely reluctant to get involved with people unless they're certain of being liked. This means they often miss out on potential friendships and romantic relationships because they won't take the risk of reaching out or being vulnerable with others. They have a very high threshold for certainty that they'll be accepted before they're willing to engage. People with AVPD are preoccupied with being criticized or rejected in social situations. They're constantly watching for signs that others disapprove of them, and they often interpret neutral or ambiguous social cues as negative. They view themselves as socially inept, personally unappealing, or inferior to others. They're unusually reluctant to take personal risks or engage in new activities because they might prove embarrassing. This can significantly limit their life experiences and opportunities for growth. They often stick to familiar routines and avoid situations where they might fail or be judged. The key difference between AVPD and simple shyness is the severity and the impact on daily functioning. While many people feel shy in certain situations, someone with AVPD experiences such intense fear of negative evaluation that it significantly restricts their ability to work, form relationships, and engage in normal social activities. Here's an example of how AVPD might look. Mark is a talented graphic designer who works freelance from home because he's terrified of office environments where he might be judged or criticized. He rarely attends industry networking events, even though he knows they would help his career, because he's convinced that other designers will think his work isn't good enough. Mark has been invited to join a local hiking group several times, and while he loves hiking and desperately wants friends, he always declines because he's sure the other members will find him boring or awkward. When he does have to interact with clients, Mark over-prepares extensively, writing out scripts for phone calls and revising emails multiple times before sending them. He often misinterprets neutral feedback as harsh criticism and spends days analyzing conversations for hidden meanings or signs of disapproval. Mark wishes he had a romantic relationship, but he's never asked anyone out because he's absolutely certain he would be rejected. Even when someone seems interested in him, Mark assumes they're just being polite and that they'll eventually realize he's not worth their time. Dependent Personality Disorder. Now let's discuss Dependent Personality Disorder, or DPD. This disorder is characterized by a pervasive and excessive need to be taken care of, leading to submissive and clinging behavior and fears of separation. People with DPD have difficulty making everyday decisions without extensive advice and reassurance from others. Someone with DPD struggles to make decisions both big and small without input from others. This might include decisions about what to wear, what to eat for lunch, or which route to take to work. They genuinely feel incapable of making these choices on their own and become anxious when forced to decide without guidance. They have difficulty expressing disagreement with others because they fear loss of support or approval. Even when they have strong opinions about something, they'll often go along with what others want rather than risk conflict. This can lead to them being taken advantage of or ending up in situations they don't actually want to be in. People with DPD go to excessive lengths to obtain nurturance and support from others. They might volunteer to do unpleasant or difficult tasks just to maintain approval and care from others. They have trouble doing things on their own, not because they lack the ability, but because they lack confidence in their own judgment and capabilities. They feel uncomfortable or helpless when alone because of exaggerated fears about being unable to care for themselves. This fear of being alone can lead them to stay in unhealthy relationships or rush into new relationships immediately after one ends. When a close relationship ends, people with DPD often urgently seek another relationship to provide the care and support they feel they need. They have difficulty believing they can function independently and are convinced they need someone else to take care of them. Here's an everyday example. Lisa is 28 years old and has never lived alone. She went straight from her parents' house to living with roommates in college, then moved in with her boyfriend after graduation. Lisa calls her mother multiple times a day asking for advice about everything from what to cook for dinner to whether she should ask her boss a question at work. When her boyfriend suggests they go to different movies, Lisa immediately agrees, even though she really wanted to see the film she originally suggested. She's terrified that if she disagrees too often, he'll leave her. Lisa has been in the same entry-level job for 5 years because she's afraid to apply for promotions. She's convinced she couldn't handle the additional responsibility without constant guidance. When her boyfriend goes out of town for work, Lisa stays with her parents because the thought of being alone in the apartment makes her feel panicked and helpless. She's aware that other people her age live independently, but she genuinely believes she's different and needs more support than others to function in daily life. Obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. Let's move on to obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, or OCPD. It's important to note that this is different from obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD. While OCD involves intrusive thoughts and compulsive behaviors that the person recognizes as problematic, OCPD is a pervasive pattern of preoccupation with orderliness, perfectionism, and mental and interpersonal control. People with OCPD are preoccupied with details, rules, lists, order, organization, or schedules to the extent that the major point of an activity is lost. They might spend so much time organizing a project that they never actually complete it, or they might create elaborate systems for minor tasks that would be quicker to just do directly. Perfectionism is another key feature, but it's perfectionism that actually interferes with task completion. They set impossibly high standards for themselves and others, and when these standards can't be met, they often become paralyzed rather than accepting a good enough result. Someone with OCPD is excessively devoted to work and productivity to the exclusion of leisure activities and friendships. They might work long hours not because they're passionate about their job, but because they believe that any time not spent being productive is wasteful or morally wrong. They're often inflexible about matters of morality, ethics, or values, holding rigid views about right and wrong. They have difficulty working with others because they believe their way of doing things is the only correct way. People with OCPD are often reluctant to delegate tasks or work with others unless those people submit to doing things exactly their way. They have trouble throwing things away even when items have no sentimental value because they might be useful someday. Here's how OCPD might appear in daily life. Robert is a project manager who creates incredibly detailed schedules and documentation for every project, often spending more time planning than actually executing the work. His desk is meticulously organized, and he becomes genuinely distressed if someone moves his supplies even slightly. Robert rarely takes vacation days because he believes that relaxation is a waste of time, and when he does take time off, he spends it organizing his home or working on productive hobbies like cataloging his book collection. He has strong opinions about the right way to do almost everything and becomes frustrated when his team members don't follow his preferred methods, even when their approaches are equally effective. Robert's garage is full of items he's kept just in case they become useful, including broken appliances he plans to fix someday and magazines from the 1990s that might contain valuable information. His relationships suffer because he applies the same rigid standards to personal interactions. He expects friends to be punctual, organized, and responsible to the same degree he is, and he has trouble understanding why others prioritize fun or spontaneity over efficiency and order. Schizoid personality disorder. Finally, let's examine Schizoid Personality Disorder, or SPD. This disorder is characterized by a pervasive pattern of detachment from social relationships and a restricted range of emotional expression in interpersonal settings. People with SPD genuinely prefer solitude and have little interest in forming close relationships with others. Someone with SPD typically doesn't desire or enjoy close relationships, including being part of a family. This isn't due to social anxiety or fear of rejection, as we see in avoidant personality disorder, but rather a genuine lack of interest in social connection. They often appear indifferent to praise or criticism from others and seem unaffected by what people think of them. People with SPD usually choose solitary activities and rarely express strong emotions like anger or joy. They often appear emotionally cold, detached, or flat to others. They typically have little interest in sexual experiences with another person and often have few, if any, close friends or confidants other than possibly immediate family members. It's important to understand that this isn't necessarily distressing to the person with SPD. Unlike other personality disorders where the person might feel unhappy about their situation, people with SPD often feel content with their solitary lifestyle and don't see their lack of relationships as a problem. They tend to be highly independent and self-sufficient, preferring to rely on themselves rather than others. They often gravitate toward careers or hobbies that allow them to work alone, such as research, writing, or technical work. Here's an everyday example of how SPD might manifest. Dr. Chen is a research scientist who has worked in the same laboratory for 15 years. She arrives at work, conducts her experiments, records her data, and leaves without engaging in small talk with colleagues. While her co-workers go out for lunch together or chat about their weekends, Dr. Chen eats alone while reading scientific journals. She's never attended office parties or social events, not because she's anxious about them, but because she simply has no interest in participating. Dr. Chen lives alone and spends her evenings reading, working on personal research projects, or tending to her garden. She hasn't had a romantic relationship in over a decade and doesn't feel like she's missing anything. When her neighbors try to make friendly conversation, she's polite but brief, and she doesn't initiate social interactions. Dr. Chen's family sometimes worries about her because she rarely calls and visits only on major holidays. But she genuinely feels satisfied with her life and doesn't understand why others seem to need so much social contact to be happy. She finds social interactions more draining than rewarding and feels most comfortable and productive when she's working alone.